You'd be surprised how many people have acquired properties in Puerto Rico and around the world, but they are struggling finding a manager. And you can be that person. And what's really cool about managing other people's properties is that it doesn't really require anything else but your time to do it, and you're really learning on somebody else's dime. So it's actually really cool because you get what you want, which is access to the property.
Yeah.
You get access to learning how to do it, and you're managing somebody else's time because you have the resource of time. Now, if you have the resource of money, the question is how much money do you have, right? You can find a property that would be like your dream property.
Yeah.
And you can finally figure out a way to get access to that property with a business that can pay for it. Because I don't know about you, but I don't like to pay for things. I like other people to pay for my things.
Sure.
So what I love about the Airbnb model is that, let's say you want a beach apartment or you want a waterfront house, you can do that. You can access to that property, whether it be like by acquiring the property or managing the property or doing arbitrage, whichever strategy you're gonna do. And you can finally get access to a property you've always dreamed of, and having the Airbnb model pay for it while you're using it. So I think that's would be the best way.
Everybody, welcome back to the channel. I'm here with my friend JC Morales, and we're going to get into why you should consider investing in Airbnbs instead of just investing in the normal, everyday, long-term rental property.
I think the reason why anybody should consider investing in Airbnb in 2024, 25, whatever you're looking at this video, is that you can find a property that would be like your dream property.
Yeah.
And you can finally figure out a way to get access to that property with a business that can pay for it. Because I don't know about you, but I don't like to pay for things. I like other people to pay for my things.
Sure.
So what I love about the Airbnb model is that, let's say you want a beach apartment or you want a waterfront house, you can do that. You can access to that property, whether it be like by acquiring the property or managing the property or doing arbitrage, whichever strategy you're gonna do. And you can finally get access to a property you've always dreamed of, and having the Airbnb model pay for it while you're using it. So I think that's would be the best way to get started.
And man, what you're talking about is my dream. Like years ago, this dream of mine was to never retire, but to have a property in different places that I wanted to go.
Yes.
And how could you do that? And so I was thinking about how I could do it. And then this thing Airbnb popped up, and it's
awesome.
like, all right, now we've figured out how to do it.
Yeah.
Now we just got to go find the properties all over the world, and we
Right.
can have properties anywhere we want.
Yeah, and what I love about it is that it's really simple. Once you look at it through that lens, you can actually take the next practical step, which is to say, okay, what is the property that you would absolutely love
Yeah.
to own? Think about it, about owning the property. And let's say, for me, it was having a apartment with an ocean view on the beach.
Yeah.
So that was pretty easy. Then you narrow down which particular location you want that apartment to be, and then you take it from there. So that's what I love about it. It's actually very easy to like go through the steps and eventually zero down on the location, the type of property, and then you can move forward from there.
And so, JC, you are, as far as I'm concerned, the expert on the island of Puerto Rico. I've heard you talk several times about Airbnb. You and I are going to put on a masterclass inside of the Apex group on School, and we're going to talk about Airbnb, and that's next month coming up. But explain to the audience, who hasn't met you necessarily, who you are and how you got started in Airbnb, because it's a really interesting story.
So first of all, thank you so much for saying that, and also like for what you're doing for the community. I think that's super cool. And anybody that's interested in getting started, I think it's very cool what you're doing because you're applying it to Puerto Rico. The way I started is that I was a kite surfing instructor on Isla Verde Beach. I always looked up to the buildings that were on the beach, and my dream was always to own one of those beach apartments, but I didn't come from a rich family. We were not poor either, but we didn't have the means to acquire second properties. Mm-hmm. So I always thought about how cool would it be if I could own one of those properties, but I didn't know the how. So one of my students became a really, really good friends with me, and he said, hey, why don't we go and rent one of those apartments? I never thought about renting, and I was like, oh, that sounds pretty cool. And then we started looking. So we made that very simple step to rent a property. And before I knew it, like a month into it, I was living in this 2-bedroom apartment with my roommate, and our goal was not to Airbnb the place. By the way, back then there was no Airbnb. Mm-hmm. So our goal was to live in that apartment. But after 2 months of my roommate living with me in that apartment, he had to move out. And I've always thought, how can other people pay for my stuff for me? So then I thought, how can I rent his room? And he told me about Airbnb, which was this new application that was coming out. And I thought, oh, let me look it up. I go on Airbnb.com. I check it out. I took some photos of his room, uploaded it. Nobody wanted to stay in his room with me in the other room. So then I saw that they had this other option where you could rent the entire home.
Yeah.
So just to mess around, I clicked an entire home. I launched the entire apartment on Airbnb, and that night I got a bunch of bookings to stay at the property, so I had to move out.
Call mom. Mom, I'm coming to stay with you.
I literally had to move back with my parents, but this apartment started renting really well,
Wow.
and I didn't have any sort of prohibition to rent this apartment from because I was leasing this apartment. So some people might be asking, how could you lease if you're, the lessor,
Yeah.
right? And I said, well, I didn't have an exclusion that would prohibit me from doing it, so I didn't think there was going to be any problem with it, especially because, once you get into it, you realize it's actually can be really good for the property and for the owner to do it. So it turned out that's kind of how it got started, subleasing properties.
So how many of those subleasing properties did you do before you started to actually acquire?
I would say that I did maybe like 10 or 15, something like
And
that.
then did that replace your kite surfing school income, and you gave that up to go do this other?
At first, it didn't. At first, I was making maybe like a couple $100 a month.
Okay.
And then as I started adding more properties, then I started seeing $1,000, $2,000, but that still wasn't enough. And my kite surfing school was doing a lot more than that.
Yeah.
But a big hurricane came to Puerto Rico and basically decimated, the water sports business. Nobody
Did it?
was thinking about doing that. So then I was forced to look into getting more properties
Yeah.
because there was actually a lot of demand for furnished accommodations during the hurricane, after the hurricane.
After the hurricane, sure.
And then I was forced into it. And before I knew it, my goal was to get to the $10,000 a month. And that took me maybe a year or 2 years. And then I basically replaced my income from the kite surfing school just doing this. And then my dream was always to become a real estate investor. So I figured, okay, this is my way. I'm going to do it.
This is your path.
Let's just freaking go for it.
That's one of the things I love about real estate investing is that we can all have a different path. I mean, there are so many different paths to success.
Yes.
Whether it's long-term rental, whether it's Airbnb, investing in hotels or shopping malls, it doesn't matter. And you pick the one that you like, pick the avenue or the lane that you want to go in, and get really good at it. And then you can do another one, by the way, which you've already graduated onto the next one from Airbnb. But let's stay with the Airbnb conversation and talk to someone who's out there that's trying to decide between, do I invest in this property as a long-term rental or as an Airbnb or a combination?
Sure.
And so those three choices maybe, how would you go about making that decision?
It's really simple. I would look at this particular property and I would look at how much is the rent per month, right? So let's say this apartment rents for $1,500 or $2,000 a month. And then I would divide that by 30, which is 30 days a month. And I would say, let's say we're using an example of, let's say this apartment can be rented for $2,000 a month. I divide that by 30 days. Let's say I want to say that's like $66 a day of, potential gross revenue that you would make in this long-term rental. And then I would go to Airbnb.com and I would look for the exact same property to see how much it rents per night. So let's say the same property in Airbnb rents for not $66 a day, but it rents, let's say, for $150 a day.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, you can see that there is a big potential to make almost 3 times as much.
Right.
And then you have to make the decision if you're willing to make the extra, work that it requires to run an Airbnb, which entails obviously doing a little bit more work than a long-term rental. But again, if you want to get into this game, I think that that's a really good trade-off for making 2 to 3 times as much as a long-term rental. And I think that's the easiest way to do it.
Yeah, and then so I recommend and I've said this on several other pieces of content, when you go to buy, I would always buy based on the long-term rental income because that's tried and true and sure. And then if you get to make the extra money through doing Airbnb, you've gotten an excellent deal. So if you're buying it based on the $2,000 a month and you can turn that into $3,000 a month, you win,
Yes.
right? And if you bought it on the $2,000 a month and you were happy with that investment and you never do better than $2,000 a month, you still got a good enough deal that you bought it, right?
I think that's excellent advice, especially like in 2024. There are some places that are changing the regulations and you never know what can happen. So let's say that today you're buying or you're acquiring a property and they allow the property to be rented as a short-term rental, but, and it cash flows or it breaks even as a long-term rental,
Right.
that's a really good sign because you basically have 2 exit strategies, right? You have the safe one, which is the long-term rental, which
Right.
it's going to work.
Right.
And then you have the more opportunistic one where it's a short-term rental and then you go for whichever one you want, but at least you know that you can go for either or.
And then one thing that I think we should touch on, because you talked about it earlier, buying a house that you want to actually have be your property, or like myself, if I want to have properties around the world and be able to travel to them, I can use Airbnb as a tool
Yes.
to be able to acquire these properties, have them cash flow, especially when I'm not there. And then when I want to go live in them, and you do this, by the way,
I do it.
then you just take it off of Airbnb and you block out the dates and you go live there during the time that you want to be here.
Correct.
How has that changed your way of looking at potential real estate? Like, I know you have this beautiful, massive penthouse on the beach. It's exactly what you described at the start of this interview.
I know, it's crazy.
And you
It's
have
crazy
probably the best one on all of Isla Verde Beach, right?
Yeah.
And you don't always live there, though.
No.
Sometimes you have it on Airbnb and you travel around Canada and wherever else jet set gets.
It's funny enough that you say that, because I am literally going to be staying at this property in the next few weeks with my entire family for about 10 days.
Yep.
I took it off of Airbnb. Yes, I'm not going to make money during those 10 days, but who cares?
Right.
Right? I get to have my dream penthouse.
Right.
Right? Like, think about it. I went from having a dream of having one apartment, now through the process of doing real estate investment, now I have a 6,500 square foot penthouse with 6 bedrooms that somebody else is paying for while I'm not using. And then I can finally go and bring my family from Canada to go stay with me there, and we can enjoy it. And also knowing that it's not really coming out of our pocket. It's actually pretty cool. Like, I can't.
mean, it's amazing.
It's amazing, right?
Yeah.
So, like, the question is, for me, once you see that, then it opens the possibilities to how many more times can I do that, which other locations, and it becomes really cool. Now I'm thinking about doing it in Canada in some places. I'm thinking about doing it in Miami, and I think, why not?
And I think you should do those things in Canada and in Miami. And the reason why I would encourage you to do that is because you're then going to open up more doors. Things that you haven't even thought about that will be profitable for you in the future. Because you're doing deals in Miami, you'll meet somebody in Miami who's a billionaire who just decides to fund your next hotel venture, or it could be upstate New York or wherever it is. But by putting yourself in different proximities to different people, you're going to open doors that you never even thought about.
I agree 1,000. Proximity is power. Like, the closer
Proximity
you
is
are
power.
to things, the more things that can potentially happen. So
Yeah. What else should we talk about with Airbnb for someone who's just getting out and starting, trying to decide whether or not they should do it?
Yeah, I think that the question is, what's the first step? And I think that once you go through the steps of figuring out what type of property you would like to, be around and participate, the next question is to figure out what sort of resources do you have access to. So let's say you have time, but you don't have money, then maybe you should consider managing somebody else's property, somebody that has money, that they've acquired this property because they probably had the exact same dream that you had, but they don't have anybody that can manage the property. And you'd be surprised how many people have acquired properties in Puerto Rico and around the world, but they are struggling finding a manager, and you can be that person. And what's really cool about managing other people's properties is that it doesn't really require anything else but your time to do it, and you're really learning on somebody else's dime. So it's actually really cool because you get what you want, which is access to the property.
Yeah.
You get access to learning how to do it, and you're managing somebody else's time because you have the resource of time. Now, if you have the resource of money, the question is, how much money do you have, right? So let's say you are, you have anywhere from like $1,000 to like $10,000. Then maybe at that time you could consider managing a property, or you could consider finding properties that are for lease. So this is somebody that put their property out for lease, and then you approach that person and you say, hey, I would like to do an arbitrage agreement with you, or a subleasing agreement with you. And there's obviously better ways to say that, and we can go into like a full class on how to do that.
I think we'll teach that when we get into the master class.
Yeah, you have to go
in
into the
October.
Apex group.
Join
so
us
you
in
can
that
learn.
Apex group if you want to learn more about Airbnb arbitrage. We're going to go through all that, and we'll have real life deal examples to talk about that night.
Yeah.
October 3rd, that's going to be inside of our Apex group.
I have so
That's
many
cool.
deals I can go through, but yeah, you could lease a property. With that money, you pay the deposit, you bring in some of the furniture and the first month, and then you're off to the races.
Yeah.
If you have a little bit more money than that, maybe you could consider acquiring the property, and then in that case, you could look into a property that's anywhere from $200,000 to $400,000 of acquisition, and maybe it costs you 20%, so you can need about $40,000 to $80,000. So as you can see, there's really no excuse. So if you have $0, you should manage. If you have anywhere from like 1,000 to 10,000, you could consider leasing and subleasing.
Doing
And if you have
arbitrage.
more than that, then you can just go ahead and buy.
Absolutely. I love it. You give options for people.
Yeah.
Everybody's got a different path. Everybody's got, or many people have different ideas of how to get there or what kind of real estate investing they want to get into so that they can get out of the rat race.
Yes.
And you're just giving us additional options, right?
Yeah, at the end of the day, you're all doing all this. You can have some financial freedom and you can do whatever the hell you want.
Doing whatever the hell you want is a really, really attractive way to live life, I think.
Yeah, pretty much.
All right, guys. So if you like that and you want to learn more about this and you want to hear from JC some more, well, one, we just did another video, so subscribe to this channel and go check out that other content. We'll attach it somewhere here. But also, join us October 3rd inside of Apex on School. We're going to teach a masterclass, and we'll deep dive into this, guys. We'll use real-life examples, and we'll really get you to where you could go and put this into effect and become a real estate investor through Airbnb.
Love it. Let's go. I'll see you there.
All right, guys. God bless.